Well, hello again. It's been quite a while, but it's nice to be back here. I'm Jonah Bliss.
And I'm Greg Lindsay, and we're putting the podcast back together again. It's been a couple of years, but it's good to see your face and good to hear your voice.
Yes, and listeners out there, it's good to imagine you listening to us, our sweet, snarky, dulcet tones. Just two white guys that love hearing their own voice. But no, I think we're so excited to kind of get the podcast show back rolling again. There's so much has changed, but also so much has not changed, and I think that's the delicious intersection to talk about urbanism, mobility, delivery, transportation, the automation of how things and goods and foods are made and brought to you. Greg, what do you think? What are you excited to talk about?
I'm so excited to talk about urban robotics. When we last did this podcast together, we were mostly talking about mobility, right? It was scooters and autonomous vehicles and all the innovations there. And really, as someone who spends a lot more time thinking about cities in the built environment, I've become much more fascinated with just the urban robotics revolution. Not just delivery bots seen out in the streets or drones or any of that, but also the back of house revolution that's been happening in F&B and in restaurants. I think, when I surveil the whole landscape from a commercial real estate perspective, the fastest change is happening at the intersection of retail, dining, and industrial as delivery blurs together these other formats. And that is where all this technological innovation is being brought to bear and all this new business model innovation is happening. And it has been happening for years. Again, I don't think it's a coincidence that Travis Kalanick, once he was shown the door at Uber, has ended up deep in the weeds of this stuff, innovating about 4 different areas at once here when it comes to real estate and ordering systems and his own robotic make lines, et cetera. So I'm really excited to be back on the airwaves with you to really dive in on the curb, quite literally. How befitting the Curbivore empire.
Yeah. And so I think that's a good segue. Give a little bio for people that might not have been following our every move and tweet for the last couple decades. What a loss for them. But I'm Jonah Bliss. I put on an annual conference called Curbivore, all about the curb, that kind of fun and messy intersection between different modes and land uses right at the intersection of the street and the sidewalk. And beyond that, I've worked in this space for most of my career as part of the team that originally created Two Road, peer-to-peer car sharing company. I've worked in e-bike space, really anything that kind of challenges how people get around cities, trying to get them out of single occupancy gas-powered cars and onto something greener. And of course, I maintain way too many newsletters, which is probably how you're going to find out about this podcast. Greg, how about yourself?
Well, I'm Greg Lindsay, and if you haven't heard my dulcet tones before, I'm a journalist by training. I've spent the last decade or so really, basically studying the intersection of cities, mobility, and all of that. I had some postings at New York University where I worked with Anthony Townsend to write an early study of potential scenarios for AVs. From there, wrote a fellowship with New Cities on really sort of how public transit agencies and public officials should respond to the mobility revolution, which led to me joining the original founding team of Commotion. And I also spent a stint at New Cities as their director of applied research. And these days I got a deck of cards of various fellowships. I am currently a non-resident senior fellow at not one, not two, but 3 different institutions: at Arizona State at their threat casting lab using applied foresight, at MIT's Future Urban Collectives lab, and then also over at the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Strategy Initiative, also doing foresight stuff. So spending a lot of time thinking about the future affecting cities. My last actual job was at Cornell Tech last year, where I was an urban tech fellow, exploring how augmented reality and artificial intelligence may disrupt cities in the same way that Uber and Airbnb once did. And how can cities get better at realizing these potentially disruptive impacts and mitigating problems before they get really out of hand? So looking forward to applying that same gimlet-eyed look at all the stuff that you cover at Curbivore.
That's one heck of a business card. While we're doing introductions, our guest today, Gary Chaglassian, runs a really interesting startup called RestoGPT and PizzaBox AI. We're going to talk all about delivery and how kind of first party is fighting back against third party. So we'll get to that in a second. But on to today's news. What are you excited to look at?
That's funny. The thing that really makes me the most excited is actually all of the urban robotics happening in kitchens. So I was in New York a week or two ago, and like the top of my list of places to visit was Colonel. Like had to go in the redesigned Colonel, had to see that robot arm. I'm really fascinated by the Sweet Green Infinite Kitchen. I'm just really interested in this sort of this interface of retail, industrial, and then mobility, right? So like I gave a talk last winter, actually to like the folks who basically run college food services. And so they were all on top of this. They were up on every word about all of the various robotic make lines that were coming out. Travis Kalanick's one in Stealth, the Sweet Green folks, the Chipotle folks. I should note, interestingly enough, that we're recording this on the day that Starbucks, in a surprise move, dismissed their CEO and brought over Brian Niccol from Chipotle. So, like, what's the Starbucks robot play is my immediate thought on this. And yeah, I just think it's really interesting. Like, this is like the fastest rate of change in any aspect of commercial real estate. And that's why I'm like zero in on this. Finally, the company that really I just find the most endlessly fascinating is the startup that out of Israel that is doing basically Kiva style robots for warehouses, but for mom and pop grocers. And this idea, that's the one that really gets me, this that you know, you could take all of this incredible innovation in logistics over the last decade and trying to bring it down to something that can fit in your local bodega, that's really powerful. And that I think speaks to a lot of the changes coming. So that's where my attention drifted. I mean, you know, we've seen the rise and fall of scooters. I put out an essay on Medium, which we'll link to in the show notes, from the book Renewing the Dream about the mobility revolution in Los Angeles. And, you know, the scooters have risen and fallen. Everyone's excited for EV2Ls. We'll talk a little bit about how LA is going to try to do no cars for the 2028 Olympics. But yeah, to me, it's about what's happening inside of the buildings and that curb interface, like Curb-before. So I'm over here with you now. My heart's with you, Jonah, as always has been.
Thank you, Greg. Yes, lots to cover.
Didn't you miss me? Aren't you glad to have me back?
Town. Yeah, I think should we just start with the news? Just roll into it. What do you think?
Well, let's rip. So yeah, we're taping this right as the Olympics have wrapped up. I know everyone's headed out to the beach the last few weeks of August here, or if you're in the American South, your kids are already back in school and summer is over for you. But yes, so we saw the huge Olympic handoff, Tom Cruise jumping out of planes as he's wont to do. But now we're in LA and Snoop is going to ride the bus, if I understand this correctly. So what are your thoughts on how Paris handled mobility? Apparently without a hitch, switched lines, they did a lot of prep on this. And how is LA going to top that when it comes to making this the next like public transit Olympic Games?
Yeah. I mean, I think big picture, right? It was. I think maybe this is just me being like way too sincere, but like the Olympics were so heartwarming, right? After all like the negativity and complaining and worrying and like, is it going to work? Like it was wonderful, right? It was just 2 weeks of human amazement and urban amazement. And even the French seem to actually be happy with what they did, which is, I think, tells you something. So I think like that, to me, that's the North Star is like, oh yeah, like people like this, right? It's obviously there's all sorts of, issues with the IOC and the politics of it all, but like at the end of the day, it's like a thing that people enjoy. And so, yeah, was the Seine swimmable? The water looked a little murky to me, but I think in that sense, if it was swimmable enough to, kind of pass the legal muster, like I think in that same sense, LA can be, car free enough that we're like, oh yeah, that's, you fooled me. But I mean, yeah, the big kind of hobby horse, right, is like, can LA's Olympics be car free? And I think, I think anything can be car free if you just make it hard to get your car there. That's always the challenge, right? Like the problem with LA is like, it's not that the transit is all that terrible. It's just that like driving's always that much easier. And so if you say, hey, you can't park by the stadium because, we've given all the asphalt to dignitaries and there's, 10,000 security guards waiting with, those little pokey things that go on the road, like you're probably not going to drive.
That's for sure. But it will be interesting to see like how Metro and LADOT deploy their resources to handle this and what we learn by them. Because I mean, the biggest takeaways about Paris for me from a mobility and urban landscape standpoint is also the Olympic Village they built in Paris. They used it for urban revitalization, built amazing projects. And I believe like the LA plan is to like kick the kids out of the UCLA dorms for 2 weeks for an Olympic Village. So there's, reuse to a point. I did think Paris did an amazing job of using that impetus of any mega project, which is like actually effectuate urban change. So it'll be very interesting to see what LA does choose to really get built in the next 4 years and how those plans play out.
Yeah.
But also like what Paris did too is just like the dynamic replanning of routes every day. That they created a plan that required closures. They communicated it clearly. They executed it really well, and people were able to respond to that. And I just think it'll be an interesting precedent about these dreams that get bandied about dynamic transit and replanning of routes and sort of using data to plan this. Can it actually be done? Paris did it to an extent, but hopefully there's a lot to learn for transit agencies around the world about like not just how to handle mega events, but also just like day-to-day life. So
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I think it's well within our reach, right? I think we know how to move buses around. I've been nagging the Olympic, the LA organizing committee for a good year plus, trying to get details on what a car for the Olympics actually means. To your point about like, is it dynamic bus routing? And yeah, I can certainly imagine there'll probably be like certain hubs where, okay, if you're a tourist, in whatever hotel you're staying around the region, come to downtown, come to the west side, come to wherever, and then shuttles from there to the major venues. Um,
Here's my question for you, or prediction to make.
yeah,
EVTOLs, right? They were supposed
yeah,
to happen in Paris. This was supposed to be the big proving ground for them. It
yeah.
didn't happen. They didn't get regulatory approval. Will it happen at LA? Will we see personal electric helicopters buzzing through the skies of LA as part of Tom Cruise jumping out of a Joby kind of thing by the end of that? Yes or no? Will it happen?
We just saw Archer saying they were going to do it, right? Like they were going to be here by
Sure.
2026 even.
Absolutely. They're saying it.
I think this city is silly enough that it might actually happen, but I don't think it'll have any meaningful. Like it's like great, like a couple rich people can beat traffic, but I don't think they're going to have them, landing on top of the Coliseum in the Cauldron. Like I don't know if it's actually going to solve the last mile problem, but it might be kind of a middle mile. Like you don't want to take the bus with the hoi polloi. Um, you can
Well, it will be
spend.
interesting because Tokyo was supposed to be really the coming out party for autonomous vehicles in Japan as well. And obviously the
Yeah.
pandemic scuppered a lot of that one too. But like this will be the third Olympics in a row where like we're actually going to use this as a showcase of mobility technology. And I've really yet to see it be used for exactly that purpose. So
Yeah.
you're right. I won't. I thought it was elegant and beautiful that the cauldron was lifted by a balloon in Paris.
That was
Harkening
beautiful.
back.
That
Yeah,
was
but you
beautiful.
don't need a helicopter, folks. You can just use a balloon. So.
No, and if we could all just balloon over the 405, think of how happy we'd be. But I think speaking of, urban transportation, it's quarterly earnings season, right? So all our TNCs, all our 3PDs have been putting out big numbers. And it seems like it's a new normal where like, is this stuff finally profitable? Has that holy grail happened? Like if not just Uber can do it, but Lyft and all the little European 3PDs, like have we crossed some sort of Rubicon, Greg?
I don't know, man. I would say I've read about, I don't know, at least 100,000 words by Hubert Horan promising me that Uber could never be profitable. I mean, also there's all the wreckage of public transportation systems and taxis, livelihoods that they did to do it. But yes, they seem to have become stable businesses. And I'm curious, I mean, the one that jumped out at me was actually the University of Michigan research showing that Uber Eats actually is cannibalizing Uber and especially Lyft, interestingly enough. I think mostly due to driver dynamics with deadheading. But to me, it stands out because, right, like you can measure accessibility in a number of ways. And like for years, we heard all of the public policy folks at the TNCs talk about, last mile and how this will, alleviate transit deserts. And instead, people are using them to create private taxis for their burritos, as that meme went around there. Like, is inflation really bad? Or as we see in the data, people are not giving up their private taxis for burritos. Ordering food delivery has been very resistant to inflation and to these high interest rates environments. So yes, perhaps that's their ultimate destiny here. They built giant platforms for private burrito delivery. But I don't know, I mean, what jumped out at you in terms of like the ongoing sustainability? I mean, is Lyft going to make it is my question here. Like, what's the ultimate prognosis of Lyft? We've all thought they were circling the drain for a long time, and maybe the circle is just like slightly slowed a bit, or do you think like they're in an orbit that will last?
I mean, they looked like they were right on it was like, what, $5 million profit or something, something to make your mom proud. No, yeah, it seems like we finally made it, right? And whether or not that's a on the net good thing to happen, that's, I think, a bigger debate. But no, yeah, I
Well,
think it seems like the labor supply has reached some sort of stability, which I think to your point is like that research about like, oh, there's only so many drivers, so like once you give them food options, it pulls them out of the passenger pool, and that brings up prices there. So that was a fascinating piece of research, right?
Well, and a couple things there. I mean, yeah, the Fed, based on last week's jobs numbers, has the Fed finally tanked the economy enough where, like, sorry, you have to go back to driving for Uber again, so we'll do that one. But slightly more seriously, the two pieces related to that stand out that I think is a lot different since we last did a podcast in the last couple of years. One, we see Uber as part of its ongoing, we're going to try to electrify its fleet, try to do a deal with BYD. So one thing we should need to watch in coming episodes is Uber the Trojan horse of Chinese EV automakers into the United States, despite all the tariffs and maybe even potentially bans. That'll be interesting. And number two, Waymo, like Jonah, like EVs are real. It's happening. Like the numbers
EVs are
coming out
real.
of California is like the number of paid Waymo trips are going through the roof. I used it in Scottsdale earlier this year, and I mean, it was a car ride, but it was still kind of uncanny to sit in the passenger seat while the wheel turned itself. But yeah, people are really turning to that one, and they're still subsidizing it, so it's cheaper than Uber and cheaper than taxis. We're going to go through this cycle again with that. So I'm very curious to see about whether like the final Uber killer is here, and it turns out to be Waymo, perhaps. Perhaps their time has come.
Yeah. We've we keep coming up with new ways to bring down the marginal cost of getting around cities in some sort of car, but we forget that you have to also bring up whatever the fixed cost is, so we don't just flood the world with even more four-wheeled devices. But that's the bitter medicine that no politician wants to ever suggest.
Certainly not in Arizona. Yes, no, not there.
Let alone in New York State, right? So can't do it there. Thanks, Kathy. Can't do it anywhere. And then, I don't know, speaking of robots, I mean, it's not just that we've started seeing robots on the street, right? We're seeing robots in the back of the house. There's there's the infinite kitchen that's making your amazing salad bowl, right? What do you think about that, Greg?
Yeah, well, I'm curious. Like I mentioned earlier, like I'm just utterly fascinated with this stuff, and it's interesting to contrast the news coming out of Sweet Green, which does seem like they had very good numbers. Their losses are down, their revenue is up, they're seeing same store sales increases, and yeah, they're rolling out their infinite kitchen concept to pump out those salads. Man, we all got to have our slop bowls, with better efficiency and bring down those costs. But it will be interesting about what that does to change the urban environment. And that's, again, what I'm endlessly fascinated by this stuff is. So Pete Wells, outgoing restaurant critic for the New York Times, wrote a real banger of a final column there, bemoaning the reservation systems, the robotics, the fast turnaround, the fact that restaurants are becoming increasingly digitalized spaces in which you're supposed to eat and get the hell out kind of thing, and this massive turnover and churn. And so I wonder about what it's ultimately going to mean for these places. And again, the fact that we're optimizing these restaurant archetypes for office workers who no longer work in offices to a great degree in these kinds of districts. So what does that actually mean? And then that ties to, finally, I guess this is the other thing I've been watching for the last couple of years is that while you and I are both good urbanists and believe in walkable density, the vast majority of Americans are moving to the far exurbs of Dallas-Fort Worth, and we're seeing revitalized drive-throughs, which are just terrible from an urban land use perspective all the way around, and seeing all these suburban land use forms that are optimized for these kinds of people. The fact that McDonald's has come out with its first new concept in 50 years
Cosmics,
with Cosmics, which is aimed at the never before existed, but the now 3 o'clock caffeine and snack power hour as you leave your house for the first time of the day to pick up your kids from school and then do your terribly congested trip chaining out in your suburb. That doesn't sound like fun to me. They saw
that Panera Bread caffeinated lemonade killed someone. They said, we want some of that.
We want in on that action. So I just think it's interesting that all this automation is obviously tied to these greater changes of both higher wages, higher inflation, and then also this change in Americans who moved to the Sun Belt, even bigger droves during the pandemic, leading these changes. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what Sweet Green does, but I'm paying attention to all of those, and I'm curious how they pan out in that regard. But I don't know. I mean, what's your favorite of those? What's your take on Kernel? I mean, obviously watching the original Mr. Chipotle trying to go back to the drawing board and figure out what the hub and spoke model. There's just so much little interesting innovation here about how do we decrease the retail frontage while ghosting the back end. I've always found ghost kitchens interesting for this way about their novel uses of urban space. Yeah,
that combined with the sort of outpost, right, where it's okay, you have a big enough office tower, we'll just bring all the sacks over here versus making you come to us.
Which is basically a Tiff and Walla. India perfected that how many years ago?
Yes, yeah. Well, let's get those reusable tins, right? At least that's a little bit greener than all our, compostable quote unquote packaging. It's definitely a bifurcation, right? There's yes, if you still live in a bustling enough, business district where there's enough activity to make a group order, then yes, we can have a centralized automated commissary that's powering your not very interesting bowl. Or if you are out in the, XXX numbers of Denton, Texas, it's too hot for you to go outside. So maybe a machine will suffer for you. And we're just here stuck in the middle, Greg.
Well, speaking of suffering, tell me about this because here in Montreal, where all the seemingly every American urbanist is coming to take their summer vacation. I was just hosting Dart's Patrick Kennedy, and I've got a couple others who are coming next week. But here it's just 80 degrees and sunny day after day after day. What is happening in the American Sunbelt here, where I read about temperatures well into the hundreds here? I mean, we talk about driving, we talk about these urban forms, we talk about this, but how is this affecting public transport and and the fact of how people are actually going to get around in LA during Olympics in August in 2028, where it's going to be 110 every day? How are we going to grapple with that?
You say that, but right now it's the high today is 83, and I was seeing numbers.
I love that we've come around to we're doing a podcast about the weather, man, which I guess feels apropos in a way. But
everything's always about the weather. To me, that was it was in the high 90s some days in Paris, right? So I don't think that sort of temperature range is that crazy. Obviously, if you're the one trying to do the 400 meter, you might feel differently. But no, to me, it's not so much about the special events, right? It's about the everyday, just poor Joe Schmo trying to get to work, right? So it's interesting, seeing a renewed push around bus shelters in LA after decades of slow acknowledgement about the status quo being insufficient. We're finally getting new shelters in place, the STAP program. There was just a report out of New York about how the hottest, crappiest bus shelters in the Bronx are 15 degrees warmer than leafy parts of Midtown. So it's definitely a nationwide phenomenon. And to me, the big question is to your point, talking about Dallas, right? Dart, the exurban cities are threatening to basically withhold their funding. And so if that wait for a bus, which is probably already half an hour in Dallas, doubles up to an hour, that's all of a sudden dangerous amount of time to be outside in the sun if it's an hour by a asphalt baked 10-lane road with not even a strip mall to keep you shaded. So that's what's scary to me.
No, absolutely, and that'll be another theme for us to watch here as we reboot the podcast too. Is looking at some of that ongoing wrangling about public transportation and funding. I won't talk out of school having Patrick here and him sort of filling me in a bit about how that's playing out there. But I do think it's interesting that a decade ago you had cities like Atlanta that had failed transportation bills. T-SPLOS I think it was called. Well, in places where LA where you get Measure M where it would actually pass. What's worse, Jonah? Not having your transit bill ever pass, or having it pass and then watching your suburban polities try to claw it back or kill these projects? It'll be interesting to see if American cities, just like we've seen the sort of those pushback and clawback on electric vehicles and complaints about charging infrastructure. I really hope that as we restart this we're not starting it at a moment where, we're going to tip backwards into decline, after I think, a solid 2 decades of gains for transportation and mobility in America. Feels like maybe we're going to start to see austerity kick back in here or disillusionment with a lot of it. But I'd like to be wrong, maybe.
It was, I mean, just to bring it full circle, right? After watching the Paris Olympics and saying wow, imagine having vision and planning and funding for not just managing decline or trying to incrementally oh, we can make things 5% better, but just hundreds of miles of new rail, hundreds of miles of new bike lane, a vision for better urban society. Wouldn't that be nice?
Come to Montreal, Jonah, along with everyone else here. Mayor Plante has added hundreds of miles of bike lanes. We just built the cheapest light rail system in North America at about 1/10 of the cost per mile of the Second Avenue subway in New York. I don't know how it stacks up on Metro, but yes, the Francophone dream is also alive in North America here in Montreal.
Dream. Yeah, yes, everything's better in French. But
maybe
I
one
think
day I'll learn
on
to speak
that, with that amount of optimistic complaining, we're gonna have a lot to talk about over the next coming weeks. Anyone listening to this again, we're gonna be on the hunt for interesting guests with cool things to say about cities, mobility, delivery, the world. How those goods and foods and services are made and manufactured and brought to you. So please shoot your inquiries to us. And then I'm excited to chat with Gary Chiglesian. So we're going to get to that in a second. All right, and so we're back. I'm here with Gary Chaglazian, my friend, the generous sponsor of this episode, and the leader of an amazing company, Resto GPT, which has a cool new product out, Pizza Box AI subscriptions. And I think before we get into the fun feature, I think Gary, let's talk a little about how'd you get involved in this crazy space?
Hey, Jonah, nice to be here. Thanks for inviting. Yeah, it's a funny story. I want to never actually discussed this previously publicly, but so I'm a first generation immigrant. So while, was going to LA, my dad, who was an engineer, he invested in a car wash. So, it was fun to be in that environment, even though it was a rough neighborhood on Manchester City, South Central LA. So I was the one who was running the whole thing. And I saw that there is something's missing, right? People are sitting, waiting, and there's nothing to eat. So I decided, okay, so what's the solution? So I got a hot dog cart. So that was my first experience experience with hospitality, and it worked.
Wow.
So yeah, that was my sort of experience how I got into this business, and then that led into opening a full scale restaurant inside of that car wash, and that's where I got my sort of knowledge, self made knowledge, I guess, I would say how everything's done. And what happened next is my friends were invited back to Eastern Europe. This was the time where all the changes were happening back then. I had to
Yeah.
manage hotels because there's a lot of new interesting concepts were opening back then. There was nobody to manage it. They were telling me, hey, come over and take a look what's happening in this new environment. There's no restaurants here. There's nothing is here. So after a while, I decided to go and see. It was amazing. It was almost like really nothing was there except McDonald's that just opened. There were lines, huge lines, and the problem was there was no real estate. I mean, you could not buy anything, you could not rent anything because back then there was no law about the ownership. So, knowing the industry in the United States, what I did is I bought a food truck and shipped it to Russia. And
Wow.
that was the first one we started. And then it went to Ukraine, and then it went to Czech Republic. So it was all the Eastern European countries. So that one became two, the two became four. And it was like the place to go for back then because nothing was available. So we started doing burgers, hot dogs, and that kind of stuff. People were standing in line. At the end, it was 8 food truck operations called American Lunch Truck Company. So it was so popular that a an event company who was managing all the major events, they bought it from me. So yeah, that was basically my scaling of this business in another country. That helped me to set up a restaurant management firm, and I became the person in Eastern Europe to bring American brands. So I started working with Chili's, with Johnny Rockets, and other like American brands that we brought to those countries, and that's the backstory.
Yeah, what an amazing, it's sort of the immigrant
Yeah.
dream there, right? Kind of
Yeah.
come to America, make good, and bring a little bit of it back to the old country.
Exactly.
And so then somewhere along the way, you kind of thought, huh, like things aren't working great in restaurant world. There's so many problems. I'm gonna start a software solution to to make my own life difficult, but everyone else's
Exactly.
easier.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I was always techie, right? It's always interesting to me how we can use new technologies, how we can make them more useful for the industry. So it all started back then with more visual technologies. We were involved with 3D tech, digital signage. So I created the first company that was digital signage in partnership with Philip 3D Solutions from Holland. And we had 3D screens in all the supermarkets. So it was a very fun and unique concept. Again, we were bought out by the supermarket chain, so they decided, okay, let us sell advertising. So it was a good, interesting concept. And then, so that led to another project, which was very early on. It was augmented reality. So I really fell in love with augmented reality back then. It was so new and there was really low tech. It's nothing really available how you could show it as it is today with mobile phones and so forth. So we decided to make our lives, as you said, more difficult and try to invent new things we can do with augmented reality. So it started with how we can use augmented reality in restaurant space. It was more like, okay, so let's make masks with brands in the restaurant so they could sort of like use it as a promotional tool. Then it
Yeah.
became games with augmented reality with the brand of the restaurant in it. Finally, it was more a menu. So how can we use AR to make the menu come alive and make it fun for kids, right? Games and that kind of stuff. So that was my first initial sort of involvement with tech. We put a team together. We were developing everything together. It was just back then when Facebook introduced their AR tools, when iPhone started, being more AR friendly. So that was the beginning.
And today you're focused on delivery and storefronts, right? Let's get
Yeah.
into Resto GPT.
Yeah, yeah. So that led into how we can make the digital industry more effective inside of restaurants. Also, again, so that many things are not working well, it's more difficult. We started with virtual brands because we had a lot of kitchens, and it was then when virtual brands actually became virtual brands. We just had a lot of menus inside of kitchens utilizing our knowledge with the products, ingredients, and that stuff. And so it became quite difficult to manage. So we needed tools. So we started developing our own tools how to manage them. So that was the initial start of restaurant operating system, basically. That led into okay, so now we've got the brands. How we'll optimize the delivery. So start building the back end, connecting with the third parties, managing, having a single dashboard, just making it easy to operate more efficiently. So that was the initial start with the technology, and every year we got much more knowledge. The team was getting much more experienced in the food tech space. Yeah, so that was the second part. After that, that's where we got into RESTO GPT, and RESTO GPT was more like, okay, so we have all this knowledge, we have all these tools, but how can we make restaurants to adapt to it extremely quickly? And that's where the idea of just input a menu link and you get a full-fledged delivery infrastructure built without any involvement, without any effort, just a menu link, and we pull all the information. You receive a website, a storefront, management platform already with the integrations with third parties, with first party, and so forth, so on.
So using an
Yeah,
LLM to basically ingest some existing assets from
ex-
your restaurant and build a whole web presence for you.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, just one part of it.
And then in terms of the actual, once you've built it and you have it up and running, like how do you kind of push restaurants towards first party, right? Like I think everyone knows that third party is
Yeah,
expensive, but it's got, they claim all these upsets from the marketplace. Like what are you
yeah.
seeing once a restaurant transitions to first party delivery?
We always said that you have to be on all channels, right? It's an omni-channel game, so third parties are also building business. You need to look at it more as a promotional tool, more a marketing tool, generating orders. And if you can convert them, that's great, right? If you can't, then just use them as they are, a promotional tool, a marketing tool. So what we've done is, again, we've created many different solutions, QR codes, links, meta pixels that we could have followed any order and get that customer data and then convert them into a customer of that restaurant by sending them some sort of an SMS or email, with a special offer that they have to have today at this second. And if they do, they get a free delivery or they get their delivery refund. So that made those customers to react, and why everybody will want to claim their $6 back from the delivery, and that's what we got the data, and the restaurant got the customers back basically. So we have a lot of tools like that actually integrated. We're very much focused into how to convert customers into first party. We still are, but at the same time, we feel that it's an omni-channel game, and it has to be positioned that you need to be everywhere. That's where your customers are. So you have to be able to work with the third parties, you have to be able to work with direct ordering, and any other tools such as search engines, discovery engines, and so forth, so on.
Yeah. Now, I'd say there's no cuisine quite as associated with delivery as pizza, right? And so
Yeah,
you've been working on this new product, Pizza Box AI, specifically geared towards mom and
yeah.
pop pizzerias. Um, and it sounds like there's kind of a fun new subscription product that works, right? Can you talk about that?
Uh, it's not just fun. I think it's a great product. So
All
we
great
always had,
products are always
yeah,
fun.
yeah, we always had pizzas in our stack. So because pizza is one of the most complex products that you could build a menu for, right? Because it has so many different ingredients, it has hidden ingredients, it has modifiers, and so forth, so on. So not every online ordering could really truly handle pizza menu. Many say they can't, but in reality, that's not the case. So we always had that, and we're always trying to make pizza to be our benchmark. And if you could do pizza right, then you could do anything right. Then we participated in Pizza Expo. It was our first time. It was like really, we sort of okay, let's participate. Actually, we didn't participate. We sent an AI employee there. So we had this, we had
Cuts
this.
down on flight expenses, right?
Yeah, exactly. We put this and it was like had cameras, so we could see who's coming there, counts the people. We just wanted to see what's happening, how people interact, and it was fun. But what it showed me, it's a huge industry. I mean, it's the only industry that has their own expo. And plus, knowing pizza, that most people order pizza, it's a comfort food, it's easy to deliver. Pizza was there way before delivering, way before the third party started delivering,
Yeah.
right? So we've decided, okay, so that makes sense. Why don't we focus on that? Because it'll be much uh, much sort of easier to deliver the message if we're focused on pizza. That's where we've created Pizza Box, which in a sense it uses the engine of RESTO GPT again, but just focused on pizzerias. So what pizzeria does is they just input their menu link. It could be any menu link, the bank party, the red, POS, whoever. The system was really building that beautiful website if they needed a website, but a storefront with all the features and functions, but for pizzerias, again, considering their menu, considering the specials, and so forth, so on. So that was the initial start, and we saw great success. We saw a lot of pizzerias coming to us, coming from competitors, which was good because we were offering something new, something better. Our fees were always very democratic, right? It was very accessible. It was never a contract, never a monthly fee. It was more based on
Per order.
transactional, yeah,
Yeah.
transactional fees, and it made sense. So that's how we got into the pizzerias. We're always thinking, so online ordering is great, right? I mean, it has a lot of solutions in it. But on the other hand, there's other 200 online ordering companies out there. Even though we do have the data management, we do have the CRM system, we do have the marketing platform, which is all connected into our ERP sort of backend platform. Still, when you try to explain to a restaurant, so you still sound almost the same as everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, and in order for you to differentiate, you have to do some, it's very difficult, because everybody else says the same thing. We're in a digital
Everyone
world,
says
we
their
do
fees are the
this, yeah,
lowest, their tools are the
exactly,
greatest. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. We have all the integrations, POS, blah blah blah. So it's all the same. So for an average pizza guy, his concern is, listen, I need to make money, I need to pay rent, I need to buy products, and I just got my POS installed with Toast. Why would I change right now to a new solution, which is probably better, but it's going to take so much hassle, right? So, those type of things were always an issue for us. We're always thinking, so what can we do? And that's where I've been following Andrew Siemens, this guy on LinkedIn. He was posting his experience building in public, automation, this and that. It was interesting to me. He had this sort of post on pizza subscriptions he was doing in his restaurant, and it was like, it's interesting. What is that? So I reached out to Andrew. I said, hey Andrew, you are that sort of person who talks about it. Why don't you become a spokesman, right? I mean, so we want to do this on a large scale, really use tech behind it, not just you know
Spreadsheets.
piece of yeah, but
Yeah.
really build something around the whole platform. And he agreed. So that's how we started. So again, initially with Andrew, so he sort of told us a bit about his experience and what we got this. I mean, there was no tech really. There's more like pen and paper, Excel sheets. And if you want to do 10, 20, 30 subscriptions, 50 subscriptions, maybe you could use pen and paper and calculator, right? Maybe to do that. But if you really want to do 200, 500,000, and that's what we want restaurants to achieve,
Yeah.
impossible without a technology.
Yeah. And then just
Yeah.
for people listening to kind of talk through how it works, it's basically Joe customer, I like my local pizza shop. They're offering this pizza subscription for 1 year, I pay an upfront fee and basically lock in a free pizza every week for 52 weeks, right?
Yeah, I mean, the system is built that you could do whatever you want. It could be per week, it could be per day, it could be a slice a day, it could be per
Watch
month.
out, arteries,
Yeah,
but yeah,
exactly. But why we love this? Because it's a subscription. It's more about data, right? I mean, that's the only platform we could really get the customer data, no matter it's first party, third party. They still have to subscribe. They have to, input their information. And most important, it's about loyalty. So yeah, you're right. So the way the system works is restaurant, he sells pizzas at a certain amount. Usually the amount is quite attractive. Plus minus is the cost, right? It depends again, or whatever the pizzeria chooses. Customer pays up front, so pizzeria gets access to, you know, capital without any interest, the cash
yeah,
flow that any pizzeria needs
yeah.
today, any restaurant actually needs
It's
today.
sauce and dough backed loan.
Yeah, well, you could say that, except you don't pay interest. I mean, nowadays everybody, right? I mean, you go to POS offers something, right? The bank offers something, but try to get that. Very difficult, different guarantees, different agreements, percentage, fines, fees, and so forth, so on. So it really doesn't make sense. This way, they raise more without any sort of difficulties. And then what's the beauty of it is then they get the customers coming back to pick up their weekly pizza. So they have that customer retention. So it brings customers back. And the whole platform that we built was that we offer those customers to upgrade their pizza to upsize it, get extra ingredients. So you don't want to have the same pizza, cheese pizza every week, right? Or cheese and pepperoni in some cases. So usually customers take that and then they take their meatballs with it, or they take hoagies with it, right? So it works well for restaurants, and restaurants obviously get their customers back, have loyalty, raise cash. It works,
Yeah.
it's a win-win for everyone.
Yeah, if you like a restaurant, it's a great way to support them, but actually get something you want, pizza.
Yeah.
And from the restaurateur's perspective, not only you get the cash up front, but yeah, I mean, if you're doing it right, the margin on these pizzas should be so good that you're not losing money on the whole.
Oh,
But then once you sell a bottle of Coke, some chicken wings, like
exactly.
you're bringing them back in
Exactly.
for more.
There was an interview by Sean Walsh of, forgot who else. Yeah. So they were saying, so how can I promote my food in the community? And the guy was saying, okay, you need to give out your food. You need to make sure people taste your food. So how can you do that? What's the best way than having people pay for that in order for them to come back weekly and taste your food, right? And come back with offers, come back with your specials. You have now a way to communicate with those customers, and that's what our platform does. I mean, it's unique in a way that it collects all the data. It builds that email, SMS marketing campaign tool, so you could always contact them. So yeah, that's the bottom line. So we help
yeah,
pizzerias now to make money, manage their customers, bring them back, and upsell to them.
yeah, yeah. Seems like a
Yeah,
win-win-win.
exactly, exactly.
Last question for you, Gary. I know you started your career in hot dogs, and it sounds like I don't want
Yeah,
to say you're ending your career, but you're this phase of your career, you're fully in pizza because you also own a pizza shop
yeah,
in Lacaniano, Flint Ridge, right? Like, what are you learning as you're doing the
yeah.
software and the messy hardware?
Well, that's an important part because a lot of software companies do the talk, but don't do the walk.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
they try to sell you something, but they don't have zero knowledge how it really works. And we've been lucky enough to be on both sides of the industry, both as the restaurant owners, pizzeria owners, and tech companies. So one of the reasons we have this AI Pizza Lab, as we call it, because it's probably one of the most automated pizzerias out there. But most importantly, we do all our testing, before anything goes out. So we sort of see the customer experience. We ask questions. We see the mistakes. We can correct it. We see the experience. So based on that, it allows us to understand the product, understand if it's needed or not, how the customers react. And that helps us to take it out. And if any questions arise, we already have a solution. We already have an answer. We've
yeah,
already been there. So I think that's one of the big things. At the same time, it makes money, right? So it's like the best of both worlds.
yeah, yeah. This is very much an industry where you need to not only be getting your hands dirty, but
Oh
also
yeah.
greasy, saucy, and sometimes burnt.
Well, we have
And
a
anyone
good.
that
We
came
have a. We
to
have. Yeah.
Herbivore this past spring, we were serving your pizza. It's
Yeah.
despite all the tech hype, it's also just darn good slices.
Well, actually, it's a great pizza. The pizzeria was there before us. They use that old New York pizza dough tech and so forth, so on. So it's like really good stuff.
All right. Any final thoughts? Where the industry's headed?
I think, everybody's talking about, their thing, the digital data. I think what I like about what we're doing right now, it combines all of the above, right? So with pizza subscriptions, you get the data, you get the marketing, you have the digital platform, you got the ordering, all the nuances that, that sort of brings, such as the smart pricing, customer retention. Again, all those things are combined. So I think loyalty probably is going to be one of the major things coming in the future. It already is, but I think now with AI tools, with better utilizing customer data, that's going to be something growing massively. One thing I wanted to add, I think one of the big pluses that we've noticed with the subscriptions and
Yeah.
the community likes this whole program. They supported themselves. And what's even more interesting, receive some inquiries from schools. So listen, it's a great program. Is it possible for us to integrate fundraising programs within this type of concept? So we're working right now with schools actually in La Cañada, which is considered one of the top schools in California, private schools and public schools.
Yeah.
So we will do our test, and once that works, we will roll that down national. So any pizzeria that will work with us with their subscriptions, they'll get access to their PTOs automatically, right? So there'll be another channel for them to sell subscriptions because, again, the bottom line is to sell up to 1,000 subscriptions. We don't recommend more because it's probably a bit difficult to manage, but that's the amount. So we want to give that tool that will enable them to launch campaigns, marketing campaigns, and automate the sales. And that's what Pizza Box subscription does. And that's what we're going to focus on from now on.
That's great. And talk about a captive audience, right? No one loves pizza quite like school kids. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
it's cool to see a product that helps the pizza shop, helps local
Oh,
customers, and
yeah,
it
100%.
maybe even helps the school. So that's a
Actually,
win-win.
that gets me so excited. I mean, really, I love working in this industry, but sometimes it gets boring. This gets me excited because there's so many different avenues, different ways we could uh, work with, and that's where we could really utilize the machine learning. That's where we could utilize the AI that everybody talks about, but nobody understands how to use it. There's different ways we could use that to achieve our objective.
Gary, thank you so much for chatting with me this afternoon. And listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like this, there'll be more episodes coming soon. So like and subscribe and tune in for more.